She stood alone on the ridge, finger resting just outside the trigger guard, and wondered how it had come to this, how one woman had become the final decision between silence and massacre. The radio crackled once, then went dead. No more orders, no more permission. Below her, the convoy rolled forward, unaware that the valley had already decided their fate. Alina Voss exhaled slowly, the way her father had taught her when fear threatened to hijack reason. Slow breath, empty lungs, quiet mind. Through the scope, the choke point sharpened into focus, and with it, the truth she hadn't told anyone yet. They were not walking into danger. They were walking into an execution. 48 hours earlier, in a cold hangar at Bagram, no one had noticed her except to doubt her. She'd sat on a Pelican case, disassembling her rifle with the practiced calm of someone who trusted precision more than people. The men from SEAL Team 4 had filled the room with noise, gear clattering, jokes bouncing off concrete walls, confidence spilling out of every movement. One of them had smirked at her, another had laughed. Didn't know the army sent teachers on missions like this. She hadn't responded. She never did. Experience had taught her that arguing wasted oxygen better saved for altitude and pain. They didn't see the scar beneath her sleeve. They didn't know why she preferred silence. They didn't know she'd already buried men who'd laughed the same way. In the briefing room, the plan had been clean, too clean. Intel said the valley was quiet. Drones confirmed it. Row was strict. Observe only. No engagement unless fired upon. Alina had felt the unease then, that familiar tightening behind the ribs. Mountains didn't go quiet like that, not unless someone wanted them quiet. When she'd raised the concern, the commander hadn't looked at her, just at the screen. "Stick to Overwatch, Chief," he'd said. "We'll handle the rest." Now lying prone above the valley, Alina understood the real meaning of that dismissal. They trusted machines more than eyes, protocol more than instinct, and rank more than truth. Below her, 60 men waited in the rocks. Above them, one woman counted heartbeats. The first shot broke the morning like a whispered confession. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was necessary. The RPG gunner never fired. His body folded before the sound reached him, and for 3 seconds the valley hesitated, confused, stunned by a silence where chaos had been promised. Alina didn't wait. She worked the bolt, another breath, another correction. The machine gun died before it sang. Down below, voices erupted, panic, disbelief. The ambush unraveled not with explosions but with questions. Who was shooting? From where? How? She moved through them patiently, methodically, her mind detached from outcome and anchored in process. Target, wind, distance, breath. Each shot removed a pillar. Command, firepower, coordination. And still no one thanked her. No one acknowledged what she'd done. They never do, until it's almost too late. When the mortar round landed short, her heart didn't spike. It settled. This was the moment she'd been preparing for since the first footprint on the ridge. She missed once, adjusted, fired again. The explosion was ugly, imperfect, real. No cinematic fireball, just physics and consequence. Below, the convoy moved again. And then the sniper fired. The commander went down hard, and for the first time, Alina felt something crack, not fear, not anger, but regret. She had warned them. Now she had to save them anyway. The duel was brief, brutal, intimate. The second shot nearly killed her. The third ended him. Blood soaked her sleeve. She ignored it. Pain was a language she'd learned to translate into time. She kept firing. When the flanking squad broke cover, she stopped them one by one, not with fury but with inevitability. They ran. They fell. The mountain absorbed the rest. Her rifle grew hot. Her arm went numb. Her vision narrowed. Still she stayed. 6 rounds left, 3 minutes to extract. That's when she saw the wire. The bomb wasn't meant to kill soldiers. It was meant to punish survival. She didn't think about probability. She thought about responsibility. The propane tank vented, the spark caught. The blast erased the exit and cleared it. When the convoy finally escaped, Alina was alone again, bleeding, spent, invisible. The retaliation came all at once, rockets tearing stone apart, bullets stitching the air. She fired her last 2 rounds standing, because lying down hurt too much. The bolt locked back. Silence returned, not because the fight was over, but because she had given everything she had. They found her hours later, half-conscious, still gripping the rifle like an anchor. She never stood trial. Official reports credited combined suppressive effects and enemy miscoordination. Unofficially, the men she saved never laughed again when a woman entered the room. Alina left the service quietly, no medals, no speeches. Sometimes she hikes alone, high above roads no one remembers were once kill zones. And when the wind is right, the mountains are silent again. Not because they are empty, but because someone listened. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did no one look at her when the briefing ended, like she hadn't just seen something no satellite ever would? Alina Voss felt it the moment the projector shut off. The room relaxed too fast. Chairs scraped. Helmets came on. Jokes returned, loose and careless, the kind men tell when they believe the danger is already mapped and measured. She stayed seated, hands folded, eyes on the frozen frame of the valley still glowing faintly on the wall. Mountains don't behave, she thought, they wait. She had learned that lesson early, long before the uniform fit her shoulders the way it did now, long before silence became her language. A voice cut through her thoughts. "You good, Chief?" It was Miller, the commander. He hadn't been mocking this time, just dismissive in a different way, like checking on equipment, not a person. "Yes, sir," she said, flat, controlled. He nodded, already turning away. That was the problem. He thought the conversation was over. But the feeling in her chest didn't fade. It sharpened. On the flight out, the Chinook vibrated with anticipation. Red lights washed over the team, turning faces into masks. The men were relaxed, too relaxed. Someone was talking about a bar back home. Someone else was chewing gum too loudly. Alina sat opposite them, spine straight, rifle secured, breathing slow. She kept her eyes closed, not to rest but to listen, to feel the aircraft's rhythm, to let her mind run ahead of her body. She touched the inside pocket of her vest, where a small, folded photograph lived. Her father, younger than she ever remembered him, standing in snow with a hunting rifle longer than she'd been tall. Silence is never empty, he'd told her. It's full of information. You just have to stop making noise long enough to hear it. The ramp opened, cold air rushed in, the jokes stopped. Green light. She jumped last, not because she was ordered to, but because that's where she belonged, behind, above, forgotten. The freefall stripped everything down to essentials. Wind, gravity, time. No opinions followed her out of the aircraft. No doubts, just physics and choice. When the wind sheared and pushed her off course, she didn't fight it right away. Panic wastes altitude, she assessed, calculated, adjusted. Landing 2 clicks north wasn't failure, it was position. She buried the chute fast, hands moving automatically, then froze. The footprint wasn't large, not dramatic, just wrong. Too fresh, too deliberate, facing the valley. That was when certainty replaced doubt. Someone had been watching the landing zone. Her radio barely worked. The mountain chewed signals like bone. When she warned them, the response came clipped and irritated. Drone shows clear, maintain discipline. Discipline, she almost smiled. She began the climb without answering. Her legs burned. Her lungs protested. The mountain tested every inch she took, but pain was familiar. Pain didn't scare her. What scared her was how calm she felt. When she reached the hide, the valley opened beneath her like a held breath. Roads twisted, rocks weighted. Shadows lied. She scanned slowly, patiently, and the valley confessed everything. Machine guns hidden where erosion didn't belong. RPG teams tucked into stone like they'd grown there. Men disciplined enough not to move until told. 60. She counted twice. Below the convoy appeared, 3 vehicles, confident, fast, loud. She tried again. Radio, clear words, numbers, facts. Denied. That was the moment the mission changed. Not tactically, morally. She wasn't choosing to disobey. She was choosing who paid for obedience. When the RPG gunner lifted the launcher, Alina felt time narrow to a thin, fragile thread. She remembered being ignored in classrooms, overlooked on ranges, passed over for teams that later failed without her. Ignored feels small until it is. Her finger tightened. The shot wasn't revenge, it wasn't anger. It was responsibility. As the ambush collapsed piece by piece, she didn't feel pride. Pride comes later when survival is certain. All she felt was focus, and beneath it something quieter. Relief. Relief that she had trusted herself when no one else did. When the radio finally exploded with confusion and fear, she stayed calm. Calm was the only thing she had left to give. Then the mortar appeared. That was when fear tried again, sharp, cold, invasive. Mortars don't argue, they don't hesitate, they erase. She missed once, corrected, fired again. The explosion wasn't beautiful, it was final. And still, the mountain wasn't done. The sniper's bullet cracked the air and dropped the commander, and Alina felt something twist deep in her chest. Not guilt, but weight. Every life saved adds weight. Every choice leaves residue. When the duel ended and her arm burned, she taped it tight without looking. Blood was information too. As long as it flowed, she was alive. She kept firing. When the flank broke, when the men below realized who had been keeping death off their backs, something changed in the air. Not gratitude. Respect doesn't bloom that fast. Awareness. She was no longer invisible. And that meant the mountain would demand payment. As the convoy prepared to move, Alina scanned one last time and saw the wire. The bomb wasn't meant for combat. It was meant to punish escape. Her options collapsed into one. She destroyed the road to save the men. When the blast echoed, she didn't flinch. She just whispered confirmation and watched the vehicles disappear into dust. Only then did the valley turn fully toward her. Every barrel lifted. Every voice focused. She was no longer Overwatch. She was the cost. As rockets tore stone apart and bullets found the ridge, Alina fired her last round standing, not because it was brave, but because lying down hurt too much. When the rifle locked empty, she stayed upright anyway. Sometimes survival isn't about what you have left. It's about what you refuse to drop. How long can a body stay upright when everything inside it is screaming to lie down? Alina didn't know the answer. She only knew that if she sat, if she surrendered even 1 inch to gravity, the mountain would take the rest. The rifle was empty now, bolt locked back, metal ticking softly as it cooled, but she kept her hands on it anyway. Muscle memory, ritual, defiance. The gunfire slowed, not stopped, just measured. They were adjusting. That realization carried more weight than fear. Fear was loud. This was quiet, professional. Someone down there understood what had happened. Someone had stopped panicking and started thinking. Alina scanned through her scope out of habit, even though there were no rounds left. Shapes moved differently now. Wider spacing, patience, angles. They had learned. Her radio crackled once, static, then a voice distorted but real. "Voss, Alina, do you copy?" For a second her throat closed, not from emotion, from disuse. She hadn't spoken in a long time. "I'm here," she said. The words felt fragile like glass. A pause, then disbelief poorly hidden. Jesus, we thought. I know, she said. Listen carefully. She fed them coordinates, numbers precise enough to matter, warnings sharp enough to cut through shock. She told them where not to stand, where not to look, where death was waiting patiently. They didn't interrupt. That was new. When the transmission ended, she leaned against the rock and finally let herself feel the pain. It arrived all at once, greedy and overwhelming. Her arm throbbed with every heartbeat. Her ribs burned. Her vision pulsed at the edges. She laughed once, short, humorless. So this is the bill. She tore open another dressing with her teeth and pressed it hard against her arm. The bleeding slowed, not stopped. Enough. Movement to her left snapped her focus back. A figure crawling low, using the same rock she had once chosen. Careful, skilled. Too skilled. She reached for a sidearm that wasn't there anymore. Lost somewhere between the second mortar and the third rocket. No weapon, no cover, just timing. She waited until he committed, until his weight shifted forward and balance betrayed him. Then she moved. The rock was loose. She knew it the moment her foot touched it, but momentum had already chosen its path. The stone gave way, sliding loud and sudden down the slope. The man froze. So did she. For one suspended breath, neither of them moved. Then he raised his rifle. Alina threw herself sideways as the shot cracked past where her head had been. Stone shattered. Dust filled the air. She rolled hard, pain flaring white-hot, and slammed shoulder first into the ground. The world tilted, narrowed. The second shot missed because his footing slipped. Luck is a liar, her father's voice whispered. It helps once, then it leaves. She grabbed a fist-sized rock and hurled it, not to hit, but to distract. When he flinched, she closed the distance with everything she had left. The fight was ugly, clumsy, human. There was no elegance, no choreography, just breath and weight and teeth clenched against screams. He was stronger, she was more desperate. Desperation won. When it was over, she sat back on her heels, chest heaving, hands slick with blood that might not have all been hers. The man lay still, eyes open, staring past her at a sky that didn't care. She closed his eyes, not out of mercy, out of habit. Her legs shook as she stood. The mountain felt steeper now, less forgiving. She staggered back toward the hide, heart racing, not from fear, but from the sudden understanding that she could still die here. Easily, pointlessly. The radio was silent again. Minutes passed, maybe more. Time had lost its edges. She found herself thinking about a memory she hadn't visited in years. A cold range. A younger version of herself, smaller, angry, trying to outshoot boys who didn't think she belonged there. Missing once, missing twice, then stopping. Her instructor had leaned close and said quietly, "You don't need to be louder than them. You just need to be truer." She had learned that lesson the hard way. The extraction signal never came. Instead, the valley answered. More movement, more voices. They were coordinating again, adapting like a wound that had decided not to bleed out quietly. Alina repositioned with what little strength she had left, dragging herself behind a boulder that offered more shadow than cover. Her breathing was shallow now, shaky. She checked her vest. One flashbang. One smoke. That was it. She smiled faintly, enough to confuse someone, not enough to save herself. When the first man crested the ridge, she waited until he was close enough to see her eyes. Then she threw the flashbang and rolled. The explosion stunned more than sound, it shattered expectation. Men yelled. Someone fired wildly. The smoke bloomed thick and white, swallowing detail and confidence. Alina moved through it like a ghost, low and quiet, every step rehearsed by years of being underestimated. She didn't run. Running is loud. She vanished downslope, heart pounding, vision swimming. When she collapsed behind a rock, she stayed there, not hiding, resting. Her body finally rebelled. She faded in and out of awareness, catching fragments of sound, the distant whump of aircraft, the echo of shouted orders that weren't meant for her anymore. Hands grabbed her shoulders, voices familiar ones. "She's alive." Disbelief again, softer this time. They loaded her onto a stretcher. The sky above blurred into motion. She felt weightless, then heavy, then nothing at all. When she woke, it was quiet in a different way. White walls, beeping machines, pain muted by chemicals. A man sat nearby, Miller. He looked older, smaller. "You were right," he said, no defense, no explanation. She closed her eyes again, not out of anger, out of exhaustion. Weeks later, when the reports were written and rewritten, her name appeared only once. Buried, technical, bloodless. She didn't fight it. Some victories aren't meant to be framed. When she left the hospital, she walked slowly, carefully, learning her body again. The world felt louder than she remembered. Too many voices, too many opinions. But inside, something had settled. She had been ignored. She had been doubted. And still she had chosen to act. Not for recognition. Not for approval. But because silence, when it matters, can be louder than any order. And sometimes, being unseen is exactly what allows you to change everything. What happens after the noise fades, after the blood is washed away, and the valley is reduced to coordinates on a report? Alina learned the answer in fragments. Recovery wasn't heroic. It wasn't even linear. Some mornings she woke up convinced she could run again, that her legs would obey if she just asked them the right way. Other mornings, the weight of the room pressed her back into the mattress, and lifting a glass of water felt like a negotiation she might lose. Pain had changed. On the mountain it had been sharp and useful, a signal to adjust or compensate. Now it was dull, unpredictable. It arrived late, stayed too long, and left questions behind. She hated that part the most. They moved her to a quieter facility after the first week, away from cameras, away from the casual curiosity of people who wanted to see what survival looked like up close. The halls smelled like antiseptic and resignation. The staff were kind in the way professionals learn to be, attentive without attachment. Miller visited twice. The first time he stood near the door, hands clasped behind his back, as if unsure whether he was allowed to step closer. He talked about weather, about logistics, about how quickly the valley had gone quiet after extraction. He didn't talk about her. She let him speak. Silence still did most of the work for her. The second time he brought a folder, thin, too thin. "They're closing the loop," he said. "No inquiry, no formal reprimands." She understood what he wasn't saying. No accountability meant no spotlight. No spotlight meant the story would remain clean, palatable. "Your call," he added, "if you want to push back." Alina looked at the folder but didn't open it. She was tired of fighting battles that only existed on paper. "No," she said, "let it rest." Miller nodded, relief and regret crossing his face in equal measure. Before he left, he stopped. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I won't make that mistake again." She watched the door close behind him. She believed him. She just knew belief didn't change outcomes as much as people like to think. Physical therapy began as humiliation disguised as progress. Simple movements exposed how much she'd lost. Muscles forgot commands. Balance hesitated. Her left arm lagged behind her intention as if it needed convincing. She swallowed frustration like medicine. Daily, necessary, bitter. At night the dreams came, not of gunfire or blood, but of waiting. Endless waiting. Being seated at tables where no one asked her opinion. Standing at the edge of rooms where conversations curved away from her. She woke with her jaw clenched, heart racing. The old anger resurfacing in quiet ways. Ignored again. Weeks passed. She learned to walk farther, lift more, accept help without interpreting it as weakness. That last part took the longest. The day they discharged her, the sky was gray and undecided. She stood outside the building with a duffel bag that felt heavier than it should have and wondered where, exactly, she was supposed to go. Her apartment felt unfamiliar, too still. The walls held echoes of a life she'd put on pause without asking permission. She unpacked slowly, arranging things by instinct. Rifle case last. She didn't open it. On her kitchen table lay an envelope she hadn't noticed before. No return address, just her name, written carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A list of coordinates. Nothing else. Her breath caught not with fear but recognition. She knew that handwriting, tight, deliberate, someone who wasted nothing. She folded the paper and sat down. The coordinates weren't a request. They were a door. 2 days later, she drove north without telling anyone where she was going. The road narrowed, then disappeared into gravel. Mountains rose ahead, familiar and indifferent. She parked where the trees grew too close together for comfort and hiked the rest of the way. Her pack was light, her steps cautious. The clearing appeared suddenly, like a held breath released. 3 people waited there, 2 men, 1 woman, all older, all quiet. No ranks, no introductions. The woman stepped forward first. Her hair was gray at the temples, her eyes sharp. "You took longer than we thought," she said. Elena shrugged. "I was busy not dying." A hint of a smile passed through the group. They didn't ask her to recount the mission. They didn't praise her. They didn't apologize. They asked different questions. Why did you stay? What made you fire when you did? What would you do differently if no one was watching? Elena answered honestly, sometimes slowly, sometimes with long pauses where she checked herself, making sure the words matched the truth. They listened. When it was over, the woman nodded once. Good. That was it. They didn't offer her a job. They didn't promise redemption or purpose or closure. They offered alignment. A way to work where being unseen wasn't a flaw but a requirement, where silence wasn't punishment but trust. Elena took a day to think about it, just one. She spent it hiking alone, feeling the strain in her leg, the ache in her arm, the quiet strength still left in her lungs. She thought about the men she'd saved, about the man she'd fought, about the road she'd destroyed to give strangers a chance to live. She thought about how often she'd been told to wait. The next morning, she said yes. Training resumed in ways that felt more like remembering than learning. The body complained, then adapted. The mind sharpened. Old instincts found new shapes. There were no uniforms, no flags, just work. Sometimes the work was watching. Sometimes it was warning. Sometimes it was preventing a moment that would never be written down. She learned to live with that. Months later, standing on a ridge halfway across the world, Elena felt the same wind she'd known before. But this time, she wasn't alone in the way she used to be. She was chosen, not because she demanded it, but because she had acted when it mattered. And in that quiet understanding, she found something she hadn't known she was missing. Not recognition. Belonging. What does it mean to belong to something that can never acknowledge you existed? Elena didn't ask the question out loud, but it followed her everywhere, across borders that weren't marked on maps, into rooms where names were never exchanged, into missions that ended before anyone knew they had begun. Belonging, she learned, was not warmth. It was clarity. It was knowing exactly why you were there and accepting that no one else ever would. The first operation came without ceremony. No countdown, no handshake, just a location, a time window, and a sentence that stayed with her long after she folded the briefing paper and burned it. "If this goes wrong," the woman had said evenly, "it will be as if nothing happened." That was the point. The city was dense, humid, alive with noise that hid intention. Elena moved through it dressed like someone forgettable, Loose clothes, hair tied back, posture slightly tired. She felt the old instinct settle in her bones, the instinct to disappear. She took up position before dawn, wedged between two concrete rooftops that smelled faintly of rain and rust. Below her, life unfolded without drama. Vendors set up stalls. Children ran barefoot through puddles. A man watered plants on a balcony 3 floors down. Her target wasn't a man, it was a moment. A meeting that wasn't supposed to happen. A transfer that would tip something fragile into open violence. Her job wasn't to stop it with force. Her job was to make sure it never finished becoming real. Hours passed. She waited the way she always had, breath steady, mind alert, thoughts kept at arm's length. Waiting had once felt like punishment. Now it felt like purpose. When the moment finally arrived, it almost didn't look like anything at all. A car slowed. Another pulled in behind it. Doors opened. Words were exchanged too quietly to hear. Alina noted details: shoes, hands, the way one man's shoulders tightened when another leaned too close. She made her choice without hesitation. A single action, small, invisible. The transfer failed. Confusion replaced certainty. One man walked away angry, the other left empty-handed. The city absorbed the disruption like a stone dropped into water. No shot, no chase. No story. She exhaled and packed up. Back at the safe location, she sat alone and let the adrenaline drain. This was the part no one talked about, the after. The space where your body still expected danger but your mind had already moved on. She thought briefly about the valley, about the ridge, about the moment she'd realized she was the cost. She didn't regret it, but she didn't romanticize it either. Over the next months, the pattern repeated. Different terrain, different languages, same quiet calculus. Alina became fluent in subtlety, in restraint, in choosing not to act as often as choosing to act. It was harder than pulling a trigger. Some nights she woke from dreams where the radio crackled and no one answered. Other nights she dreamed of ordinary things, drinking coffee, walking through a market, being just another person moving through space. Those dreams unsettled her more. During one debrief, the woman, whose name Alina still didn't know, studied her longer than usual. "You're carrying something," she said. Alina didn't pretend not to understand. Everyone does. "Yes," the woman replied, "but not everyone refuses to put it down." That stayed with her. On a later mission in a cold region where breath fogged the air and sound carried too far, Alina hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. The objective was clear, the outcome predictable. But she saw something she hadn't expected. A younger version of herself, maybe. Not literally, but close enough to hurt. Someone standing on the edge of being ignored, of being told to wait, of being overlooked until it was too late. Alina adjusted the plan. It cost her time, it increased risk, it bent the rules without breaking them. It worked. When she reported back, she didn't justify the choice. She simply explained it. The woman listened, then nodded once. "Judgment," she said, "that's harder to train than skill." Alina understood then that this wasn't just about what she could do. It was about how she carried consequence. The weight never left, but it redistributed, settled into something she could live with. One evening, months later, she found herself back in a hospital, not as a patient, but as a visitor. A soldier she'd indirectly protected lay unconscious, unaware of how close the line had come to breaking. Alina stood in the doorway and watched the steady rise and fall of his chest. He would never know her name. That was fine. Outside, the city hummed, ordinary, unaware of the small adjustments that kept it that way. As she walked away, Alina felt something unfamiliar, not pride, not relief, but quiet acceptance. She had crossed a line long ago, from needing to be seen to choosing not to be. And in that choice, she had found a strange, steady peace. Belonging, she realized, wasn't about being claimed. It was about choosing where you stand when no one is watching, and staying there, even when it costs you something you'll never get back. What remains when the work is done, when the silence you helped preserve finally turns its attention back on you? Alina asked herself that question on a morning that looked ordinary in every way. The kind of morning people forget as soon as it passes. Pale light, cool air, a city waking up without urgency. She stood on a balcony that wasn't hers, coffee cooling in her hands, listening to traffic that flowed because it could. No alerts, no coordinates, no quiet knock at the door. Just time. Time, she had learned, was the hardest terrain of all. The network didn't dissolve. It never truly does. It simply loosened its grip mission by mission until calls came less often. Windows widened. Urgency softened into readiness. Alina understood what that meant long before anyone said it aloud. She was no longer needed in the same way. The realization didn't wound her pride. Pride had burned off years ago, stripped away by necessity. What it left behind was something quieter, heavier. Purpose without momentum feels like standing on a stopped train, still balanced, but unsure whether to step off. Her body told its own story. Old injuries announced themselves with weather changes. Her arms still lagged on cold mornings. The mountain had taken its tax slowly over time. She adapted, she always had. One evening she received a message that wasn't encrypted, wasn't urgent, wasn't even official. A simple address, a time, no explanation. She almost ignored it. Almost. The place was unremarkable, a small range outside the city, worn down by years of use and neglect. The kind of place where echoes linger and expectations don't. She arrived early out of habit and waited by her car, watching dust settle in the slanting light. A young woman approached the gate, rifle case slung awkwardly over one shoulder. She hesitated, then pushed it open, scanning the area like she expected someone to stop her. No one did. Alina watched quietly. The woman moved stiffly, uncertain. Her stance was wrong, her grip unsure. But there was something else there too, focus buried under nerves, determination buried under doubt. Ignored, Alina thought. Not yet, but soon if nothing changed. She didn't intervene right away. She waited until the first shots went wide, until frustration tightened the younger woman's shoulders and anger crept into her movements. Then Alina stepped forward, slow enough not to startle. "Mind if I say something?" she asked. The woman turned, surprised, assessed Alina quickly. Civilian clothes, no visible rank, just another observer. "I'm fine," she said too quickly. Alina nodded. "You're rushing the breath." A pause. The woman tried again. The shot landed closer. Alina said nothing. They stood like that for a while, one firing, the other watching, until the younger woman finally lowered the rifle and sighed. "Everyone tells me to wait," she said suddenly, "to be patient, to earn it." Alina met her eyes. "And what do you think?" The woman hesitated. "I think if I wait, they'll forget I was here." There it was, the familiar edge. Alina considered the answer carefully, not because she didn't know it, but because truth, when given too easily, can feel like an order. "Then don't wait," she said, "but don't rush either. Act when it's right, not when you're angry, not when you're afraid." The woman studied her, suspicion and curiosity warring across her face. "Who are you?" Alina smiled faintly, someone who learned the difference late. She left before more questions could form. As she drove away, something loosened in her chest. Not closure, she'd stopped believing in that, but continuity. The quiet understanding that experience doesn't end when missions do. It changes hands. Days later, Alina returned to the mountains alone. Not for work, not for training, just to walk. The trail was steep, familiar. Her pace was slower now but steadier. Each step was intentional, earned. At the ridge, she stopped and looked out over a valley that wasn't marked by memory or blood. Just land, just wind. She sat and listened. The silence wasn't empty. It never had been. It carried echoes of decisions made without witnesses, of moments altered by hands that left no fingerprints behind. She thought of the men who laughed once, of the ones who learned, of the ones who never would. She thought of the road she destroyed to save strangers, of the cost she paid and the cost she never saw. She thought of the young woman at the range, standing on the edge of being overlooked. Alina breathed in slowly, deeply. For the first time in a long while, she felt complete, not because something had been added, but because nothing was missing. She stood, shouldered her pack, and began the descent. Below, the world moved on. People argued, hurried, laughed. They crossed streets that were never cratered, lived days that were never interrupted. They would never know why. And that was the point. Sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes it isn't recognized. Sometimes it doesn't even survive in memory. But it acts anyway. Because dignity doesn't need permission. Because courage doesn't wait to be invited. Because the most important moments in history often pass without applause. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.